super excited about it.
Well, it says we're live on YouTube. Well, that's a nice change. Hello, everyone. It's Tuesday. It's 4 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock here in Costa Rica, 7 o'clock on the East Coast, midnight in London, 1 a.m. in Italy, 8:30, 9:30 a.m. Wednesday morning in Australia, and it's usually Facebook Live for us on this time on Tuesdays. But we're having some technical difficulties with Facebook, so my brilliant team has put us here on YouTube, and we'll let everybody on Facebook know that we're here. So here we are. And I'm really pleased to have as our guest today, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, who is a unique specialist in assisting our body in aging gracefully. You know, I don't like saying anti-aging. I'd rather say graceful aging. And so first, Dr. Lyon, welcome so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks everyone for joining in all these different time zones. Pretty impressive.
Yes, right. It is. So tell us about your area of expertise, which I've never heard anyone having that dialed in focus before, which is
well, it's been a pretty long road. So actually I did 17 years of training to come up to the point where my practice is so specialized. I practice this concept called muscle-centric medicine. And it's this concept that muscle is actually the largest organ in the body. And it happens to be an endocrine organ. So I just want to take a step back because, well, it sounds like there's a...
Well, cheering. They're cheering. Yay.
Retrograde. God, I don't even know what's going on. Hopefully someone will come off.
Could you explain what you mean by an endocrine organ?
And I definitely will get to that. So muscle, we typically think about in the form of locomotion. We think about being able to work out or run or pick up our bags, but really, or even how we look. But really, that's only a small subset of what makes it so important. It functions in the body as an endocrine organ. So when you contract skeletal muscle, i.e. during exercise, it releases something called myokines. And myokines are uniquely released from muscle cells. And wait till I tell you what these are. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So this is relatively new science. Was the concept of myokines really came out in 2009 by Penderson, and it's very interesting. So muscle released something called interleukin 6. And as everybody knows, interleukin 6 is a cytokine. Now, what that means is it's a protein or molecule that goes throughout the body that is very inflammatory. However, when you contract skeletal muscle, as in the form of exercise, it also releases a myokine. And this is the concept of muscle as an endocrine organ. So I know that there's a lot of new terms floating around, so I don't want to lose anyone, but just simply stated, when you contract skeletal muscle, it releases proteins. These proteins specific to muscle go throughout the body and have an anti-inflammatory effect. They help with body composition, not just in the exercise movement or the mitochondrial aspect, but actually in the way in which you utilize carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Everybody's heard of BDNF. Contracting skeletal muscle release another myokine called BDNF, which travels to the brain, helps with aging gracefully and cognition and memory. So clearly you can see that muscle is so much more than just a locomotion device.
So this is the mechanism by which exercise helps to keep our brain strong.
Yes, it is. And it's very interesting and unique. And again, it's a new science. Also, there's a crosstalk between skeletal muscle and the immune system. So, and I will say people often think about diabetes, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, but these are diseases of muscle tissue first. Any metabolic illness like diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, even Alzheimer's, which can be considered type 3 diabetes of the brain, all start in muscle, not adipose tissue.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yes, adipose tissue, fat is secondary to impaired muscle.
So we always, in functional medicine, we always want to look for biomarkers as early an indicator as possible when our system's not working very well, as opposed to the end stage markers when you've got a disease and you get a diagnosis.
That's
So
absolutely right.
are there some early stage biomarkers of when your muscle is not producing enough of these muscle kinds?
So that's a very interesting question. I am going to give you an answer that everybody can look for. So I'm going to set this answer up by saying all metabolic issues start in muscle cell first. So muscle is like a suitcase. And when you overpack it and you're not exercising and you're overeating, all the substrates spill back into the bloodstream. And then you put on adipose tissue. So it goes to the muscle first. When you're not utilizing the muscle is the primary site for glucose disposal.
Wait. So if you're not exercising enough to have a positive balance for health, you're saying that what we eat, the residue of that, it doesn't go into fat cells, it goes into the muscle first?
So the way in which the metabolism works is it will actually work to go to muscle first, partition to muscle first, because muscle is metabolically active tissue. It is the tissue where 80% of glucose disposal takes place. So glucose, and this will lead us to the lab values that we can look for. So glucose is cytotoxic, right? When we think about diabetes, the definition of diabetes is having an elevated blood glucose over a 2-hour period of time, right?
Right. Well, it's excess glucose.
Correct.
Right.
Excess glucose, right? So you're looking at glucose markers greater than 120. You're thinking, man, I'm getting into an elevated glucose range, but after 2 hours, that should go down. Well, the primary site of disposal is muscle tissue. So if you want to think about markers of impaired muscle tissue, you have to look at blood glucose. So you look at a hemoglobin A1C, you look at fasting blood glucose. Because
for people who don't know what that means, if you're diabetic, you know what hemoglobin A1C is. It's a marker it's kind of a history marker. It's
right.
Like, how much sugar have you been eating in the last month?
Right.
Not yesterday, right? Or not just today, but over the last few weeks to a month. That's your hemoglobin A1C, and that's a really important marker to determine if your diabetes is getting worse or if you're about to get diabetes. Right. It's a really good marker for that. And so you're saying that even before hemoglobin A1C goes up, what we're seeing is there will be markers in muscle that we can identify?
So that is a good question. It's very hard to identify markers in muscle. Typically that's done through biopsy, and nobody is, I mean, that's what I did my research in. That is very uncommon unless you're an athlete and you're looking at fiber types or you're doing a metabolic ward study. So it's unrealistic to do any kind of muscle biopsy. There are micro changes that happen well before you can see fat infiltration. So what ultimately happens is your tissue looks like a marbled steak. And then when the tissue looks like a marbled steak, which comes after years of overeating or not exercising or not dosing your protein right, because you are not optimizing and utilizing this tissue, because as we age, the tissue changes. And we can talk more about it. I think it's very important for your community to understand this concept of anabolic resistance, which we'll get to. So what happens is the initial phases of unhealthy muscle manifest in high blood sugar, elevated hemoglobin A1C, abnormal cholesterol, all markers of impaired metabolism.
Right.
Here's the rub. Are you ready? We have a failure of the fat-focused paradigm. Everybody is focused on fat tissue, adipose tissue. And us as functional medicine doctors, that's the wrong tissue. That is symptomology tissue. The root cause is all about impaired muscle. So we have to shift from fat-focused to muscle-centric. And that is at the core of these issues. And the reason the recidivism rate, and which is the relapse rate, is so high is because everybody's looking at the wrong tissue.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. You're saying shift from fat focus to muscle focus.
100%. Fat comes later. So the first stop is the muscle. You've got glycogen synthase and you have errors in metabolism that all start in the muscle first. Then when you cannot utilize glucose and excess calories in the muscle, you put on body fat.
Well, let me ask you a question. Let's jump into this one. This is really good. How does insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance relate to this?
It's at the core. So actually, insulin resistance starts in skeletal muscle first.
That's what I thought.
And it is an incredibly common phenomenon of aging.
So what insulin resistance means, everyone,
Yes,
is
sir.
that your body's not using the insulin that you're making very well. It's resistant. And what you want is to be more insulin sensitive, meaning that you don't need as much insulin to get the job done, right?
And you want to know the best way to sensitize your body to insulin? 2 great ways. Ready?
Yeah,
especially for the muscle. High intensity interval training really improves insulin sensitivity. Wait a second. That's muscle focused. That is one of the most significant non-pharmaceutical agents to improve insulin sensitivity. It's focused in muscle.
So what does that mean, high intensity interval training? Let's give
And I definitely want to get to that, but I want to make sure we definitely cover the concepts of shifting the paradigm of obesity medicine, because it's the wrong focus. So high intensity interval training, it depends on where you are at your training status, but it's exactly that. It's high intensity interval training, short burst duration, and then recovery. And largely you could say that this really depends on your training status, but a great place to start is 20 minutes. And you could do 1 minute on, 1 minute off. And this is really max effort or close to max effort.
So
You can be post, by the way. You do this 3 days a week, 20 minutes. You have a highly efficient and effective workout.
So when when I was on the track team in high school, yes, yeah. we had tracks back then.
Just last year, guys. Just last year.
Years ago. Oh, thank you. We would do fartleks, and fartleks were sprint, jog, sprint, jog. Is that what you're talking about? Fast, slow, fast, slow?
So that could be considered interval training. I'm going to give you a very clear-cut example. So this would be 250 or 500 meters on a rower, max effort for time, and then you take equal amount rest. You do that 12 times, max effort. You should not be able to talk. You likely want to quit or throw up and you're done. That is high intensity interval training. It's mentally focused training with full attention and effort. If you do this, you can literally change your body composition. You augment skeletal muscle. You are now focused from fat phobic to muscle centric. And by doing that, you're now talking about root cause medicine. The root cause of diabetes, hypertension, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease is not adipose tissue. That is secondary symptomology to the primary issue, which is skeletal muscle.
So for everyone that's listening to this, first, a couple of shout outs. Dorada found us. Dorada's been with us every week from New York City. Hey, Dorada.
Hi, Dorada.
Sabrina's in Spokane. And as all my staff has told me so far, because I can't find people on Facebook. I don't know if we're on Facebook yet today, but so thank you guys who are here joining us. Thank you so much. So I'd like to stay with this thing for a minute about insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance, because what you're talking about is game changing for people. Yeah. Or the language I like to use is paradigm shifting. You change the paradigm of how you think when you understand that our focus should be for health on muscle, not on fat.
Right. And it blows my mind. We literally have a failure of this paradigm of thinking, and everybody is like trying to get water out of a boat that has holes in it.
Right. Good. So this thing about I'd like people to walk away from this discussion we're having now today. I'd like them to walk away with some how-tos, like how do I know where I'm at?
Yep.
I just love biomarkers, you know, where this is a reality check. This is where you are right now. And then they can check those things every once in a while in the future. Can we just jump into that?
100%. So I want to also bring your attention to, as we talk about biomarkers, biomarkers are symptomology focused, and rightly so, because those markers create problems.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you. I'm looking for functionally focused. What biomarkers are for functional?
So the biomarkers for muscle, if I tell you muscle is the largest organ in the body and the organ of longevity, we want to look at markers that relate to metabolism. So it's the same markers that we think about when we think about obesity or diabetes. It's blood glucose, it's insulin, fasting insulin, it's CRP, HSCRP, it's ESR rate. So it's inflammatory markers and it's blood glucose markers as well as cholesterol. And the reason is, and we can go through each of these, but I also want to point out something else that's incredibly valuable, is that the best marker of muscle health is number one, strength. So understanding your strength, where you're at, and that is very variable and very hard to track. There are some strength charts, but in clinical practice, I haven't found that to be totally validated. I say that, but there are standards, right? And then there's grip strength and walking speed for the aging gracefully community. All of that, however, might not be set at the highest mark. So when we think about practical application, you have to look at your body fat percentage. Body fat percentage, I would ideally say, tell me your muscle mass, but guess what? Nobody can tell you your ideal muscle mass. That's a problem, a core fundamental problem.
I understand. So what would our target body fat composition be?
So it depends. I typically like to see it lower. Now it's different for everybody, which is interesting. So 18% or less is a great low body fat. Some women might stop menstruating if their body fat gets to 12%. Some guys might have hormonal issues if they get lower than 10. But I think as a whole and a society, we are not particularly over fat, but certainly under muscled. But the only marker that we really have that is practical is to look at body fat and then the concomitant markers, right? Because it's kind of a backwards way of thinking about it. So we know that cardiovascular disease, diabetes, all these markers, when they are in line and functionally appropriate, then we know that muscle is healthy. That combined with good body fat, right? Lower body fat. But again, that low body fat doesn't speak to muscle mass. So Tom, you could be 10% or 12% body fat, but have no muscle.
Yeah.
But we don't know. Nobody could answer that question. But I will tell you some practical applications as it relates to insulin should be less than 5. Blood glucose, depending on if you're having protein, will vary, right? So if you are going through gluconeogenesis, so you're eating protein and you're allowing your body to generate its own glucose, then your baseline blood sugar will be a little bit higher because the body is very good at generating glucose. But hemoglobin A1C should be within normal range, whether it's 5.4. HSCRP should be 0.5, right? So these are ideal markers. I love a SED rate of less than 10, ideally 2 to 5. So these are important markers, but the most important thing is to combine that with visually looking, hey, do I look like I'm muscular and fit? I know it's silly, but it's the best we have. Unless, of course, you're going to get a CT to look at your skeletal muscle tissue, but then the argument would be which tissue are you going to look at? Are you going to look at the thigh? Are you going to look at the bicep? We don't know.
It's difficult having a discussion for the general public because we have some people who are serious athletes who will listen, some people who exercise a couple, 3 times a week, some that don't exercise. So in terms of our goals, in terms of body fat, that's a pretty easy one to get measured. well, I'll ask you first, how would people who have never had their body fat measured, how could they get their body fat measured?
So it's tricky now because of COVID. So my first piece of advice is whatever you do, it should be consistent. So, I typically utilized an in-body scale, which is a bioimpedance scale, in my practice, but my practice is all virtual right now. So I have my patients buy a home in-body scale, a small one, and we track. So that's one way. It's a very practical, easy way.
And what's the expense on those?
Huh?
What do those cost?
So my machine was my machine was like $17,000, but a home scale might be $100 or $200.
So I'd like to stay with that for a moment because this is a critically important topic for people who want to age gracefully.
Yes.
And the information you're giving us is game changing, which is focus on muscle. Don't focus on avoiding fat. And in order to focus on muscle, biological impedance is an excellent tool that you can test yourself regularly, like once a month.
I recommend once a week. You don't see huge changes. I mean, I've had some patients, you lose 2 to 2.5 pounds of body fat a week because we optimize for protein. So we focus on body composition. We optimize for maintaining lean muscle mass and, depending on their activity, even building lean muscle mass while reducing body fat. So by weighing yourself every week, it keeps you honest, and data determines outcome.
Okay, but the weighing is not for your weight.
No.
It's for your body composition.
Correct. We don't care about weight. We care about the quality of weight loss.
Exactly. So for everyone that's listening, this is a paradigm shifting concept for most people. I mean, I started doing biological impedance in 1986 in our practice, right? We had the little devices and you put electrodes on, and I mean, it's critically important. And what's also important, this is a pearl for everyone, you want to make sure that your body is in the same receptivity state every time you check it. And what I would tell our patients, we would not do a body comp test on them unless no coffee for 5 hours, no exercise for 24 hours, no alcohol for 24 hours, and no food for 5 hours. Why? Because, if you eat a big meal or a decent sized meal, or if you have a glass of wine, you might dehydrate a little bit. It's going to alter your results.
Yeah.
So you just make sure that you have the same state of being every time you check it. But if you spend, as Dr. Lyon said, $100 to $150, and you get yourself a biological impedance scale, the result will be you'll be using this every week. And you can see over time what's working and not working for you.
Yeah.
So one more question on this. Yeah. What scales do you recommend to people? I want to give them some tools here.
So the in-body scale, they have an at-home in-body scale. It's the best that I found. It may not be as great as the $17,000 one, but again, consistency of tracking with the same machine and exactly with the tips that you gave are very fantastic. If an individual had a trainer and they were seeing them doing calipers, so there's multi-site skin fold measurements also, but then we increase user error because it has to typically be the same sites at the same time. You still want to do exactly what Dr. Tom is saying. So that those are two ways that are helpful.
Great. I didn't expect this. And this is like game changing. This is something that we should recommend to everyone.
I agree. And, they could also do tape measurements, waist hip ratio, thigh, arm, because you're tracking, because what will happen is, and we'll talk about this, we have time, we're going to talk about practical ways to optimize body composition, to optimize muscle as the organ of longevity, which is exactly what it is that you might find that you actually gain weight while improving body composition. And this is because of the quality of the weight loss you've now employed. You've lost body fat and you've put on skeletal muscle. So
burn fat, build muscle.
In mind.
Burn fat, build muscle. Burn fat, build muscle. That's
How about this? Build muscle then. So it's build muscle, burn fat.
Oh, great. Agreed. That's the mantra. That's the mantra from an activity point of view. I talk about that approaching your health, we always have to approach it from multiple angles.
Right.
And I talk about it as a pyramid. And, we think of a pyramid, it's got 3 sides. No, it's got 4 sides. There's a base, and that's your structure. And where we're talking now is in the world of structure, not the biochemistry, although it affects the biochemistry dramatically, not the emotional or spiritual, although it affects the emotional, spiritual dramatically, and not the electromagnetic. We're talking about the structure. And as you're talking about this, I'm so thrilled because I just have been negligent in talking about this topic with people for years. And it's a critically important topic, critically important.
Well, it will change the trajectory of the way in which people age, especially aging gracefully. And I'm going to drop another major bomb that you don't have to wait weeks to feel better. So when you get your first meal right, by the second meal, you feel better. So we're going to talk about how you dose and optimize for protein, because protein, while the most controversial macronutrient, is the most critical as it relates to muscle health. And the quality of the protein cannot be argued, and how that affects the organ of longevity and how it affects the way in which your body composition changes. So we talked about insulin resistance as we age. There's a second phenomenon that happens, which is mind-blowing, and this is called anabolic resistance. Anabolic resistance is a decrease in the body's ability to efficiently see protein, sense protein, which is so interesting. So what happens is we eat the way that we did, where we have 2 eggs for breakfast, or a small piece of chicken, or a small piece of fish, or half a cup of yogurt. This crew probably doesn't eat yogurt, but whatever it is. And we do that in our 20s, 30s, and early 40s, and we're getting our protein in. If you continue to do that when there is that inflection point of hormonal change, then your body doesn't really recognize in a robust, responsive way the protein, because it's sub-threshold. When that happens, you'll never turn on muscle. You'll never begin to lay down muscle. You will age in a way where you see your parents age and get skinny fat. You will get tiny, you will lose muscle tissue, and you will put on body fat, and then your muscle will look like a marbled steak. So
instead of being a fillet, we want people to be a chuck.
Yeah, you have to. So what that means is, after an overnight fast, you have to get a robust amount of high quality protein, which is actually animal-based protein, or you could add in whey protein. But that amount at that first meal, whenever it is for you, should be around 40 grams.
That's a substantial amount.
Correct. And nobody is doing that. So then we start moving into the line of sarcopenia. And sarcopenia is muscle loss and muscle function, decreased muscle function, and metabolic illness that now comes with impaired muscle, which, are you ready for a bomb, can start in your 30s. Yeah. These issues, while we think of them as issues of aging, are not issues of aging. They start in your 30s. We are largely domesticated. Our macronutrients are off. Our hormones change. We're not sleeping. We're overstressed. We have all those things in the pyramid like you talked about. And then we underdose protein. We don't have a chance for optimization.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. That's a time bomb. That's really a big time bomb. So I'm going to do a shout out here. We've got C. Jones is here from New Zealand. Hey, man, thanks for being here. Dion Dosias from Hawaii. Hi from Connecticut. I'm a big fan of both of you. HSCRP, Tom talked about that last night on Base Hits. Yes, I did, Dion. Yes, I did. And there was a question. Let me find that question where is that question? Big fan of both. What is a receptivity state? What do you mean by receptivity state?
As it relates to anabolic resistance. So I think that's maybe that's what you meant, or what they meant when they were asking you, but anabolic resistance is the inability, so the efficiency, the way in which skeletal muscle works decreases. So without getting too deep into the science or the mechanism, there is a signaling process called mTOR. which stands for mechanistic target of rapamycin. That one mechanism needs to be triggered to lay down muscle protein synthesis. Interestingly, as we age, that sensitivity to that particular signaling goes down. So the way to overcome that receptivity issue, that anabolic resistance, is you have to get a robust amount of high quality amino acids, in particular leucine. Leucine is one of the essential amino acids. It's a branch chain amino acid. You have to get it from your diet. Your body cannot make it. And when you hit a robust amount in the bloodstream of this one amino acid, which easily can come from 40 grams of high quality protein, which equates to, let's see, around 6 ounces of something, you get enough amino acids, in particular leucine, to trigger muscle protein synthesis through that mTOR signaling. And now you have improved receptivity like you did when you were 20. Just simply by increasing your protein dose at one time of high quality protein.
That's really interesting. So I'm going to try and interpret this. There are two ways. Every cell in your body regenerates, every cell except your teeth. And what kind of a cell do you
bummer.
I know. Well, I've been saying this for years about this one, that our DNA says that we're supposed to be a 10. We all want to be a 10. If you look at Dr. Gabrielle, she's a 10. She's beautiful and fit, and everybody wants to be a 10. But how come when our cells reproduce, they don't reproduce as a 10? How come your thyroid cell reproduces as a 6.2 or a 5.4 and you're feeling really sluggish and tired? How come all of that happens? But your blueprint is a 10. Well, it's about the environment around those cells as to how they reproduce. It's called epigenetics. But if you keep living the lifestyle that's wearing you down, you start functioning from a 6.2, you start functioning as a 6.1 and a 6.0 and a 5.9. That's called a catabolic state. And what Dr. Lyon is talking about is you're at a 6.2, but you start changing things a little bit. Now you're rebuilding cells. You look like a 6.3 and then a 6.4 and a 6.5, and you feel stronger and younger. And people after 6 months say, "Wow, what happened to you? You look great. You look so young." And you say, "Well, thank you. I'm actually a 6.8 now. I started at a 6.1, but I've increased my protein. My mTORs are working better, and I'm rebuilding younger cells." That's an anabolic state. So we're always either going anabolic, building stronger cells, or catabolic, going down. So how do you age gracefully? That's a big question for me in my age bracket. How do you age gracefully? Well, you always want to focus on more of an anabolic state.
Correct.
So what can I do for that? Well, get the scale that she's talking about and find out where you currently are, and then start implementing some programs. Follow Dr. Lyon's work and start implementing some of these things. Change your foods, do some of the things that I talk about, and measure yourself every week or every couple of weeks. Am I heading in the right direction? Now, what kind of change can you realistically expect, Dr. Lyon, for someone who wants to put some attention on this, but doesn't have the time to train for triathlons? They want to do something to head in the right direction. What's a realistic goal?
Well, first of all, it couldn't be easier. Number one comes from shifting the mindset, the paradigm, right? So We're no longer focused on fat. We are acutely focused on skeletal muscle. So we are going to plan a nutrition program that is protein forward. And what does that look like specifically? It looks like overall protein intake, which I recommend to be 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. So that is more than double the RDA, okay? RDA is based on old school nitrogen balance studies. There's a lot of issues with it. And when you think about it, is the baseline recommendation is just to keep us living. It doesn't mean to keep us optimized, nor does it keep our tissue healthy. Specifically muscle tissue, which I told you becomes much more resistant to protein as we age. So 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. So I'm 125 pounds, or I was before pregnancy, my ideal protein intake would be 125 grams of protein. Dr. Tom, what is your ideal body weight?
That was smooth. That was really smooth on your part. I've got to remember that one.
So let's say your ideal body weight is 170.
Actually, where my goal would be, where I'd like to be, is at 175.
Okay, so 175. So I would recommend for Dr. Tom to start with 175 grams of high quality protein. And that's pretty much at the upper limit. So what does that look like?
How much protein is in one egg?
6 grams.
6 grams.
So if we were to calculate for you, I'm going to calculate an ideal protein intake meal for you. So if we were to say we do 175, let's say we divide by 4 meals a day, perfect. And this is, now keep in mind, this is a robust protein amount. I would say for you, if we did 4 meals a day and you ate 45 grams of protein, that would definitely be more than enough. Do you have to eat that much? You don't. But the key is that first meal of the day is enough to trigger that anabolic effect and lay down muscle protein synthesis. If you eat 25 grams of protein at a meal, you will not, I repeat, you will not have the metabolic effect on the muscle. This is the hands down the biggest mistake that people make. So you have to understand it's either happened or it didn't. Just like being pregnant, you're either pregnant or you're not. Okay. Yeah. There's no in between. Right. So if you eat 25 grams of protein, let's say you eat 4 eggs. Dr. Tom, you are sub-threshold, right? So it's 24 grams of protein. If my brain is working correct, that is sub-threshold. You will not most likely stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And you would so we'll just say if that's your first meal of the day, you will not stimulate muscle protein synthesis. You're doing nothing for your muscle because your body will see calories. And yes, there are benefits to those amino acids, but we have to be exquisitely and acutely aware that first meal of the day needs to have around 40 to 45 grams of protein. And listen, we could spread out your meals to hit an optimal protein intake at, between 30 and 50 grams per meal will stimulate your tissue. Now, and there are nuances to that, but we won't go into the nuances of protein cycling and some of the other work that I do, because then people will really miss the big take-home concepts.
Right. Let's take a look. What is 30 or 40 grams of protein on a plate? What does that look like?
6 ounces of protein. So it could be, for every 1 ounce of protein, there's 7 grams. So for example, if you eat a 5-ounce steak, 5 times 7 is 35 grams of protein.
Got it. Good.
And that is the same for chicken. Fish is a little bit less, so you have to eat a little bit more. Fish is 5 grams of protein per 1 ounce. So let's talk about another strategy. Or we can keep going on this one. So for those people who are like, oh my gosh, that is way too much protein, I'm never going to get that down. Here's what you do. And Dr. Tom, you and I have actually talked about this for many years. The way in which you can get away with eating less protein, let's say you don't feel well, or maybe you don't digest it well, is by adding in a scoop of branched chain amino acids with that lower protein content. So let's say you're a little person, you only want to eat 3 ounces of chicken, add in a scoop of branched chain amino acids to bring up that leucine threshold, which what we talked about exactly, Tom is right, will create an anabolic effect. Arguably food in general will create an anabolic effect, but specifically towards muscle. Now you have a muscle-centric protein for nutrition plan.
Some people have just asked, please say that again a little slower, about how many grams of protein in food.
Yes. Okay, ready? For 1 ounce of high quality animal bearing protein, meaning it runs. So beef, lamb, chicken, you can count chicken in there, not swimming, but anything that runs and is gravity bearing. For every 1 ounce, it has 7 grams of protein.
Great.
For everything that swims, that's in the water, is 5 grams of protein per 1 ounce.
Good to know. Okay. And then the branch chain, yes, branch, B-R-A-N-C-H, branch chain amino acids. How much would they add to a meal?
So that would just be one scoop because again, remember when I talked about how do we protect skeletal muscle as we age to age gracefully? You have to bring up that amino acid level in the blood. And I hate when people have to think about it. That's why I just say 30 to 50 grams per meal is a great general recommendations, you guys. So if you take away nothing else, think I'm going to have 30 to 50 grams per meal. I'm going to know what my overall protein intake is going to be. It's going to be at the high end, 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. So yeah, that's how your plate looks.
And there's a question from
branch chains. I'm sorry, you asked me about branch chains. I was so excited about making sure that everyone had a great take-home message that I forgot to tell you about branch chains. Branch chains, and listen, you don't have to add them in, but it is a way, if you're sitting here thinking, pulling out your hair going, I am never going to eat that much protein. It is a way, or if you're a vegetarian and you don't eat gravity-bearing protein and you only eat fish, then a way to help augment that, or even if you are eating plant-based proteins, to add in that branch chain amino acid, just one scoop to bring that leucine threshold up to 2.5 grams. I don't want to, give too many numbers and then everybody loses it, but bringing it up to 2.5 grams of leucine, you now stimulate muscle protein synthesis.
Jocelyn has a question. Will 30 grams of protein from plant-based protein powder meet the leucine requirement?
Wonderful question. So only if it's added. So plant protein has roughly half the amount of high quality protein. So for example, if you look at 30 grams of hemp protein on the back of a package, the amount that the body sees is roughly half that. So they're not the same. And then you have to go, the next level is the bioavailability is different. Then the level after that is plant compared to animal is the nutrient difference. Animal proteins have more bioavailable iron and zinc and creatine and carnosine, all these other things.
All the important things. And do you have a website that offers high quality branch chain amino acids?
I have a link in my IG, in my Instagram, but not yet. I will. I work with a company called First Form. They're great. You guys can go to my Instagram and click on a link, and there are products that I recommend there.
Okay. So that's a way for everyone to know what quality products would be, quality protein powders and quality branch chain amino acids. That's great.
It's interesting. We get 70% of our, according to the NHANES data, which is the largest data set, we get 70% of our calories from carbohydrates, plant-based, and 30% from protein. And of that 30% from animal-based proteins, we get nearly 100% of our B vitamins and our iron and our calcium, the bioavailable forms, and the majority of our protein. It's very interesting. Just because, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but the current narrative would make people believe one thing when in fact, as a trained geriatrician, I see totally the opposite. High quality animal-based products, if you don't have an ethical issue with it, are really some of the most healthy substances that you can eat. It's a nutrient dense matrix.
Romeo has a question. Are there natural food sources of branch chain amino acids that we can add?
What a great question. So specifically, it's found in high amounts in skeletal muscle. So a beef or a beef patty or a chuck steak or a ribeye or a fillet, anything like that has high amounts and actually optimal amounts of branched chain amino acids. Whey protein is also a great source.
Jocelyn is saying, thank you. Oh gosh, geriatrician, what is that?
So a geriatrician is a part of what I did my fellowship in. That's trained in taking care of individuals over the age of 65.
Marvelous. I can just see there'll be an army of elders who come out of your office and come out of your website, and are they're doing triathlons and whatever it'll be.
It's interesting. So when we think about, where the geriatric training is so valuable is when you see end of life, perspective is 20/20. So being trained in the end of life and seeing what aging is, and then being trained in nutritional sciences and obesity, it allowed me vision to look back. And that's actually where muscle-centric medicine was born.
That makes a lot of sense. Romeo has another question, and I think this is great because there are a lot of people out there that have some philosophical or other reasons to be avoiding a lot of animal-based protein. He's asking, what about baked beans and lima beans, chickpeas, lentils?
So you can absolutely do that. Just keep in mind the metabolic effects. And we don't have time probably to talk about it now, but when you get your protein from those lower quality plant-based, you need about 35 to 40 roughly percent more. I'll give you an example of quinoa. So you'll need about 6 cups of quinoa to equal 1 3-ounce chicken breast when you're looking at the amino acid content. And so that is a really good place to add in branched chain amino acids. I definitely do not recommend getting the majority of your protein from plants. It's not bioavailable. It's not as bioavailable. And the metabolic consequences of the caloric and carbohydrate load are devastating.
Agreed. And Romeo, and to everyone else out there, I've said this for years, the sickest people I see are often vegetarians.
Same. I actually couldn't agree with you more.
They don't know how to do it right. It's not that you can't do it right, but you really have to dial down the science if you're going to be a vegetarian to feed your body in a net positive, balanced way, as opposed to a net negative where you're in a catabolic state and wearing down the body.
Absolutely. And it's the single worst piece of advice to go vegan or vegetarian as you age, for simply the reasons that I've stated. It's just the consequences are devastating. So if an individual is doing it for an ethical reason, I completely understand. If they are doing it for an environmental issue, I would absolutely rethink it because the evidence doesn't support it. So there are other, reasons why I would really reconsider animal-based proteins.
Do you have patients who have been compliant with your recommendations, who are aging gracefully by your definition, who are vegetarians?
I'd have to really think about it.
Okay, thank you. That's it right there. You see, Romeo,
Yeah.
I put her on the spot. I put her on the spot because this is a world-class scientist on muscle aging and maintaining vitality. And Romeo, I'm not on you, man. I'm just using your question as the example to come from. It's really difficult to age gracefully if you're completely plant-based. It's extremely difficult.
Yeah. And then you have to think, what about the other nutrients? And, we think about bone and osteoporosis, but, bone is made from protein. So those individuals that are more vegetarian have the lowest bone density. They're typically smaller. They are much more likely to break a hip or fall. So these are things that their muscle mass is lower. And we know that muscle mass is directly linked to survivability. So there's tons of reasons why individuals should reconsider high quality protein.
I agree with you completely. And if someone is strong about wanting to be a vegetarian, I honor that and say, you're just going to have to do your work, a lot more work to maintain your health.
I would say in clinical practice that I've noticed there's a broccoli quota. So when you tell individuals who, according to that NHANES data, that are already eating 70%, plant-based carbohydrates to, if anyone were to give the recommendation to go more plant-based, they're going to be like, I've already had my 5 cups of broccoli. They're going to eat more pizza or carbohydrates, or I'm just going to eat more rice and beans. And that is just the caloric load in that, or even 3 bananas or whatever you're doing. It's just too much. And then, when you think about metabolic dysregulation, you've got a problem. You can't utilize the substrate for the muscle. Everything spills then back out into the bloodstream. Then you gain weight. Then you get extra adipose tissue.
There are 2 questions that are fairly similar. I'll say both questions. The first one, irrespective of weight, is there an upper limit of protein someone should eat? We have some patients who can weigh up to 180 kilograms. And what if someone is predominantly sedentary? And the second question is, can you eat too much protein?
So that's a great question. So there's never been any data. We've never seen any human data to suggest there is. That being said, you have to dispose of the nitrogen, you have to dispose of the urea. So I would say, at the very upper limit, if you're going above 3.5 grams per kilogram, there's no reason to do that. But that also being said, we've never seen negative effects in healthy individuals from eating higher amounts of protein. And there are some overfeeding protein studies of 3.3 grams per kilogram. And what they actually found was when calories are controlled for, they lost excess body fat and actually put on a little bit of lean muscle tissue.
That's
But that
marvelous.
is a great question. And you really have to think, dosing on ideal body weight. So if you have a person who's 300 pounds, you don't dose them at 300 pounds. You go, what is your ideal body weight? And their ideal body weight might be 200 pounds. Or 175 pounds. So you dose protein accordingly. And then you have to really correct for total calories and then carbohydrates and fats.
One more topic. We're going to go a little bit over because we had technical difficulties getting started. So more and more information is coming out in the last 5 to 10 years on the critical nature of the microbiome. Mm-hmm. Now, as we eat more protein, as we're moving in that direction with this topic today, the concepts of carnitine, high carnitine levels, and how it might contribute to development of TMAO. I won't do the geek words here. Right. What recommendations do you have for people maintaining a healthy microbiome in the midst of increasing their protein content?
So that is a really great question. And when it comes to TMAO, first of all, I have never clearly seen it linked to disease. I've never seen convincing studies as it relates to TMAO, okay? The other thing is that what really increases TMAO is fish, not red meat, not beef, none of those things. So I think that really that has to do with the individual's microbiome, and I haven't seen convincing studies. So I am so hesitant to make global health recommendations on low quality evidence. I think that is my responsibility is to really look at high quality evidence and make recommendations based on that. That being said, I think we're going to start to see some very interesting data as it relates to the microbiome and animal proteins. What I think is going to be most interesting is that, of course, you should have diversity in your diet. I definitely believe in eating more fruits and vegetables and balancing that with protein. What I have found very fascinating is that I have had one patient in particular, just one amazing friend of mine who is an orthopedic surgeon and a vegan. And she actually did really well. And her muscle mass was good. All these things were good. And what I think we're going to find in this data is emerging, it's just done in rats, it will be coming out, is that some people have the microbiome to be able to extract amino acids from the bugs in their gut. Hasn't been published yet, it will be. And of course, it's just still in rats, but it's very interesting to think that there is a certain amount of flexibility. Now that is likely the very rarest of cases and has to do with the age and all the other environmental aspects and perhaps how she was raised and all of these things. So I would never say we should reduce our animal protein. The average American eats 1.5 ounces of red meat a day. That is what the data says. So I do not think that people need to be concerned about adding and optimizing protein. I think that would be very bad advice. So to answer your question on TMAO, I don't think that we have good evidence. I think that we know red meat and high quality protein can absolutely be part of a healthy diet and is essential when you're thinking about aging well.
Well, that's really interesting. I've got to go back and read a number of my studies on TMAO because many of them came out of Cleveland Clinic, and I thought I'll go back and read them, and then you and I will have discussions offline.
Yeah, actually, your wife sent me a really interesting paper before, and I sent my comments on the literature back on the studies. And I will say that, when you think about looking at high quality data, you have to, if a paper says this is the mechanism of action and then never proves the mechanism of action and does a lot of statistical backflips to create some correlation, it's not a good paper. So I just think that that's really important, that you have to test the hypothesis, and then it is either that mechanism of action. And I'll say one more thing. I think we have to be really careful when we think about protein in red meat. People say that it's like the demise of all people. By what mechanism of action would that ever be true, that one macronutrient, one food source that we've been eating for 2 million years would cause such issues? So I think that that is taking a step back from the nutritional narrative that we hear and really putting our thinking caps on and really putting our clinical reasoning skills to think, by what mechanism of action would that happen? And nobody has an answer. So if that's the case, I think that we just have to reevaluate the narrative.
Yes. And if you see people starting to do this, as you ask the question.
I know. I see it, but listen, it's my mission, right? This is my mission, to really change the paradigm of thinking. If I can get more people to spread my message and to really understand that we have a failure of this fat-focused paradigm and shift it to muscle-centric medicine, and also employ the things that will help muscle, then it's a win. And you change the way we age.
Fully agree. I fully agree with that. I would have no hesitancy in supporting that concept. Well, it's been unbelievably quick because it's so good, but we're at the end here. So let me just say thank you so much. And what is your Instagram account for people to find you at?
So it's Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, and that's Lyon. You guys give me a follow, shoot me a DM. I'm very receptive. I post all the time, and I write all my own content. And in fact, if you want to learn more about myokines, I just posted today on that. My website is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I have a very informative newsletter that you can sign up for. I have a free protocol if you're interested in learning more. I have a YouTube where I talk to my mentor to bring you guys someone who's been in academic research for 30 years to you. And I'll just mention this on my IG. I do have a workshop that is only going to be available through October. If you guys want to purchase it, that is on a link to my Instagram. You'll see it in the link tree.
Marvelous, marvelous. Yep. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week, hopefully back on Facebook, if the technology gods are with us. See you next week, same time, same place. Thank you.